We need to have debates, and we need to be on the front lines with the people that's being affected. And that's pretty much anyone that has a job. Anybody that doesn't have a job, it's pretty much all over America. So with that, I'd like to introduce Ken. And everybody has this information in front of you. I really don't want to start.
It'll come back in.
I really don't want to start with what you already have. I want to tell you things that I know about Ken. Ken and I met about 5 months ago, and then I took him to the Myers Lake Buffalo dinner. And if anybody's sportsmen out there, I took Ken to 1,200 hunters and fishermen, put him in the middle of the crowd, and it was fantastic. The response was good. Ken got to go around and meet with people he normally would not meet at the dinners and the political things and everything else. And the feedback that I got from that was fantastic. I mean, if you worked in Canton, Ohio back in the 70s, 60s, we had a chance to make good money. Republic Steel, Timkins, Hercules, all the big jobs. Well, all those jobs have left, and they are sitting overseas, and they're not in Ohio anymore, and we're struggling. City of Canton's struggling. I'm the Kansas City treasurer. I can tell you about those struggles, but I won't today. But I can tell you that it's due to those type of jobs leaving Canton, Ohio, and the state of Ohio is what's created half our downfall. I know how many people have had friends that have lost their pensions that's been guaranteed to them for years. I've been there. I lost 3 different types of pensions at Republic Steel because one buyout to another buyout, to another buyout, to another buyout. And now they're calling Social Security an entitlement. Well, I know that I paid into that Social Security, and I know the company paid into that Social Security, and that's not an entitlement. That's something we all worked and earned. And I don't know who created the word entitlement to be used with Social Security, but that's not what it is. That's why we need to get someone in Congress that's going to fight for our rights. Anybody read about the Teamsters pension? I mean, those guys are really out of luck if they don't figure out a way to help save that. And that's another devastating event on pensions that's happening in the United States, where we've worked to earn that, and then they take it away from you. I had guys at Republic Steel that worked, was on their pension, they took their health care away. I mean, this has gone on all over, and whether people think health care is deserved or not deserved, that's a good debate, let's have it. But to stalemate any type of changes on either side, that's why we need Ken. We need a guy that's going to come in, and he's going to vote what's right for his constituents. And this isn't a Democratic Party issue. This is his constituents' issues. Huge difference between the party against party. If we get enough people in like Ken, who then can get a block of votes, then we win this race. We win our pensions, we win our jobs, we win what we want to win back. And that's why we need a guy like Ken in Congress, and that's pretty much where I want to start you off with. And don't forget, the VFW gave us this to use tonight. Thank you, VFW. A round of applause, please. Vernon and Hal have been, they do almost anything that we ask them to do when it comes to this. And what better place than put a veteran in a veteran's VFW? I mean, Ken flew prop planes on spy missions. Can you imagine how slow they move and how fast those missiles go? I'm thinking that's probably not the best job I'd want, but he did it for years. Ken helped veterans when there's a disaster and the Army had to be moved to help. Ken was one of the people that ran that disaster relief and helped. Maybe he should actually work for the government and taking care of tornadoes and hurricanes and forest fires and everything else going on in this country. We need someone organized that can rush into action immediately, and that's what he'll do in Congress. Ken, no more.
Thanks, Kim. And I guess for what it's worth, when it comes to dodging missiles, you don't have to be the fastest plane, you just can't be the slowest one. That was my mantra. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, good. Incredible honor being out here with all of you. The first thing I want to say is Thank you. How about can you hear me in the back? Will I just sound off? All right. Yeah. Thank you. When I think about democracy, when I think about what I was fighting for as a Navy pilot, what I was serving as president of a disaster relief organization, I thought about rooms like this. I thought about people coming together, Americans coming together, to have the conversations that undergird our democracy. I think about this campaign from its inception being a campaign of the people, going out knocking on thousands of doors, and it really brings the point home that none of this works without you. So if I could leave you with one thought tonight, and we'll get much deeper into it, but the most compelling thought that I want to leave with you is thank you for engaging, thank you for coming out. I think we've got an historic opportunity in 2018 in Ohio, certainly to send the right kind of leaders back to Congress, but also to set an example, because the rancor, the anger that I see pouring out of Washington, that I saw tearing the country apart in 2016, is not representative of the country I fought for. It's certainly not doing right by the memory of the buddies I left behind, but I feel like we can rise above it. And when I'm out there with the team, canvassing, having those conversations in driveways, that's the best reminder I need that the things that unite us as Ohioans, as Americans, are far greater, far more powerful than the things we're told divide us. So if there is, I guess, one ground rule this evening, it's let's set an example. We don't have to agree on everything. I sure hope we don't. If I learned anything from 20 years of marriage, it's sometimes we can disagree and still keep charging on. But let's be respectful and let's have a tough conversation. So that's all I got to say. Over to you guys. What do you want to hear about? Yes. And could you just give me your first name?
Yes, my name is Linda.
Linda. Thanks.
I'm very concerned about, well, clearly the government, but I'm wondering, will the next Congress be able to reverse the tax giveaway so that we can again, I mean, they did things so backwards. First they gave all the money away, and then they looked at infrastructure and said, well, what do we need? Sadly, we don't have that, but I'm hoping there's a way, if we could switch, you know, do what we all hope we achieve, to get those tax things actually to be what they were supposed to be.
Thanks, Linda. So the question was about the tax bill that was forced through, a bill written in the dead of night without any bipartisanship, any attempt to coordinate with the other side, which is an indictment of our politics more broadly, the fact that nothing happens in a bipartisan way anymore. And look, I'm grateful for the slight bump that a lot of paychecks have gotten, but if Congress really wanted to pass a middle-class tax cut, they would have made it a middle-class tax cut and not rewarded companies for shipping jobs overseas. That's one thing this tax bill does. Not given 87% of the money we're borrowing to fund this tax bill to people making over $900,000 a year. The specific answer to your question is, I think we have to rework it. I don't feel like it's going to profit us at all by throwing it out. We need to bolster those middle-class tax cuts. We need to end the giveaways, and especially end the giveaways to companies that are shipping jobs overseas. But the thing that offends me most about the bill is who's actually going to pay for it. It's not us. It's my kids and their kids. We borrowed $1.4 trillion from our children and our grandchildren to pay for this thing. That's just the beginning. That is not a fiscally responsible choice. Thanks, Linda.
May I just make a statement about that? Because I think it was my sister who years ago told me she had read a piece that said to the, when Republicans are in office, they spend all the money so that when the Democrats come back, there's nothing left for their constituents. And I think that's exactly what we just saw.
I'll leave that there. Yes.
My name is Liz, and I guess what I'm concerned about, I want to know that you're actually going to work for the people in our district. I don't care. I don't want to see, I look at the current congressman, and every time you read his voting record, it's Republican all the way down the line. I want somebody that will buck the party and do what's right instead of just following the party.
Thanks, Liz. And if I could ask you to do one thing tonight, it's to not take my word for it. Look at what I've spent my life doing. Look at life spent flying Navy combat recon planes where we didn't care one bit about partisanship or party. I've told this story to a couple of folks. I remember on one of our missions, I flew missions over the Middle East, a lot off to North Korea. We lost an engine. And in that moment, as this engine is spooling down and we're flaming out, I didn't ask my co-pilot if he was a Republican or not. We put the engine to bed, we actually finished the mission, and we got the plane down and saved the crew. That's the value I've carried with me my whole life. I grew up in a military family. We never cared about partisanship. As president of Team Rubicon Global, a disaster relief organization, party affiliation is the last thing you think. You don't even consider it when you're in the middle of a disaster. So when I think about the disaster that is our politics today, I think about the need to rise above the partisanship if we're ever going to get anything done. And I like how you put it, because my boss is not the Democratic Party or any one individual or any particular office. My oath is to the Constitution, the first three words of which are, we the people. That's you. That's you. Thanks, Liz. Okay. Yes.
It's a suggestion. Maybe the microphone could be for the questions, because I hear you, but I didn't hear the question.
Okay, I'll make sure to repeat the question. If we got to circulate the mic, we'll do that. Good question. Was that your question? Because that's the easiest one I've had.
Hi, Ken. Jill.
Of course.
What is your... I know I'm memorable. What is your stance on common sense gun reform, specifically related to school safety and arming teachers?
Thanks, Jill. And I always get a little choked up answering this one because I'm a dad. And I think about the last conversation I had with Katie. I've got 3 kids. Katie was 13, Lizzie was 8, Henry was 5. And Katie and I were talking just a couple of days ago in the car on the way back from school, and she told me, as if it was just a normal thing, about an active shooter drill, which is not the first one they've had. It's routine. This is part of growing up in our school system today. And I thought about that and realized that the first time I ever had an active shooter drill was in Kabul, in a war zone. That was my last active shooter drill. We're treating our schools like war zones. And I think about these kids from Parkland, and now from all over the country. In the case of the Parkland kids, they were hiding in closets a month ago, and now they are serving as an example for us. That is, on one hand, an incredible testament to their bravery and their leadership and their commitment, but it's also a damning indictment of a political class that has done nothing, that has failed to stick up for them. I'm honored to be, I guess, following in their wake and following their example, but boy, does the political establishment have a lot to answer for that it's taking 16 and 17-year-olds to man the trenches on this. When it comes to arming teachers, as a dad who's scared for his kid, I'm willing to entertain just about anything to keep them safe, but I know some of the challenges with that as a military person who's trained with a weapon. Let's just look at maybe a more apples to apples comparison. The NYPD trains its officers hours every week at the range. Their accuracy rate in a normal situation with someone that they are trying to take down is about around 30%. You add any variable to that, like a moving target or close quarters, it drops down to 12%. Where do you think those other bullets go? And do we really expect teachers to be trained to that level of proficiency? I just see a ton of problems with it. That said, I'm desperate and willing to hear anyone who has a solution, but this one seems a little poorly thought out to me. But,
Don, I agree with what you just said. I had lunch today with about a dozen, mostly educators and their spouses, and not every one of us thought it's a terrible idea to put more guns in schools. How do you feel about the assault weapons?
Don asked, okay if I repeat it for you guys in the back, with a bunch of educators this afternoon, and I think they're similarly concerned. How do I feel about assault weapons? The thing we have to be really smart about here is addressing the capabilities, because we could easily fall into the trap of banning the shape of a weapon or the name of a weapon. It would be like banning Honda Accords. Everyone's just going to go buy a Corolla, right? We have to address the capabilities. And when I'm talking to hunters, and I say this as a hunter, someone who grew up hunting with my granddad, I say this as a military guy. My very first ribbon in the U.S. Navy was a marksman ribbon. I respect weapons for what they are and for what they're designed for, and I respect the hunting culture. But I can look a hunter in the eye as a military guy and say, if you need a buckshot to get your deer this year, go back to the freaking range. You're a terrible hunter. So it's the capabilities that we need to address and take seriously. Lorraine.
I'm actually ready with my hands for my student organizers behind me if they have questions. I'll go with our main question. We're organizing a student rally here in Canton. Can you offer any advice to students who meet a lot of resistance from parents or educators that don't want us to do this rally?
Keep up the fight. Keep up the fight. And for every adult who rolls their eyes or says you're too young to have an opinion, you're too young to fight at this point for your lives, think about this room. Think about the adults who have your back, and call me if you have to, because we're there for you.
There you go. Yeah.
Would it be terribly expensive to have an actual trained police officer in every school forever, however many police officers you would need for how many, because some schools are much larger than others, and then have some kind of communication system in that school where in each room, in each classroom, there was a buzzer that would go right to that police officer to notify him immediately upon the sight of somebody, and they would know where that buzzer was coming from. What would be so hard about that?
Like I said, the question was about armed officers in schools, right? And a buzzer, like a fire alarm system.
To go to the police
officers. I'm at the end of my rope on this one, and I'm willing to consider anything. And we're actually studying some tech solutions. They're not solutions, but there are proposals out there to do just this kind of thing and tie into the school fire alarm system. It hurts to even say the words, but an active shooter alarm system. We can look at all that stuff, and I'm totally open to it. But it is a tough environment. Just go back to those NYPD numbers, and it's a lot harder than you think when your window is literally a couple minutes.
Well, I have nothing against banning the assault rifles, and I know you just take all kinds of beatings from people over that. I'm all for it, but I'm not a young person, so I'm not speaking for the whole United States. But I do think that there should be some discussion in Congress about that, and how to do it and what to do it. There could be a million different ways to do it. I don't know how.
Could you give me I'm Joanne.
Hey, Joanne.
Give me a reason why anybody needs an assault rifle. And if you have a teacher in a school with a pistol and someone comes in with an assault rifle, you don't seem clear. And I don't agree teachers should have guns. I taught school. No way should have guns.
Especially her.
But who needs an assault rifle? There's no reason to have that's a military weapon. Nobody needs an assault rifle like that.
No one needs a weapon, sorry, go ahead.
They should be banned.
No one needs a weapon of war. The challenge is always in the definition. And when you look at, when I think about the rifle that I got my deer with on opening day of the season this year.
An assault rifle? A military weapon?
Not an assault rifle, but it's the capabilities that we need to be talking about. It was a weapon that shot a high velocity round, but I didn't need a large high capacity magazine to do it. I didn't need a bump stock to do it. But functionally, if you take those things away, they're the same tool. So when I talk about making sure we're not just focusing on the silhouette of a weapon, but talking about its capability, no one needs a weapon that can go into a school and fire 30 rounds without being reloaded, or in the case of the Vegas massacre, 500 rounds a minute. I mean, that's crazy, and I want to be smart about focusing on the capabilities, not on the name, because the name itself, assault rifle, people are going to argue about what that means. So I want to be very, very specific about what we're
So
addressing.
you're against those weapons that, I mean, I don't know guns, but anything you can shoot like an assault weapon. You're against that?
I'm against
You're against
fully
it.
automatic
You should
weapons,
not.
absolutely. You do not need a machine gun to go deer hunting. Yes.
Ken, my name is Pete. To kind of follow up on that, you're talking specific. So what specifically are you against? For example, you talked about high-capacity clips.
Yeah.
I've heard, okay, six bullets in a clip, I can see that. Second of all, you talk about automatic weapons. What about semi-automatic? Now, I understand, you can help me here, that an automatic, you just hold the trigger and it just keeps firing. Semi-automatic, I can pull it, but I can pull it fast.
Right.
And that's why a bump stock makes a semi-automatic automatic, because it's the bumping. So my question is, okay, clip size, firing capability. In other words, in my opinion, if a person wants to have a rifle, it has to be one shot at a time. Now, I don't know about bolt action or any of that stuff. So could you clarify when you say what your personal opinion is?
That's the difference between semi-automatic, you got it. A semi-automatic is one where you can pull the trigger once and the chamber reloads itself due to the expansion of the gas. It basically cocks itself. A revolver is a semi-automatic. A pistol, the kind you see in westerns, those are effectively semi-automatic. So it's not likely that we're going to be able to get semi-automatics if you understand the definition of what that is. But a fully automatic, there's no legitimate use for that. The real outrage here is that you can legally buy a semi-automatic, and you can legally buy a kit or an adapter like a bump stock that turns it into a fully automatic. You can do both of those things legally, when the only possible reason for buying the bump stock is to turn it into an illegal weapon of war. That's crazy. That's crazy. And when you look at the lengths the other side is now going to make it even more outrageous, we just learned that one of the NRA's priorities this year is to allow people to purchase silencers without any kind of background check. Now, my dad's a lifetime NRA member, and I grew up hunting, and we're dealing with an organization now that doesn't even represent its own members. The vast majority of Americans want reasonable background checks. They don't want bump stocks. A majority of NRA members want some reason. But we're dealing with an organization that is beholden, not even to its own members anymore, but to the gun lobby. You follow the money and you get your answer on this one. My dad is a lifetime NRA member, is shaking his head at these pushes to get silencers on shelves without any type of background check required to buy them. And for what it's worth, because I saw a lot of people shaking their heads, the rationale is when I go to the range, I don't want my ears to hurt. Buy some earplugs. I'm sorry, if that's the price to keep silencers off the shelves, buy some earplugs. I'll buy them for you myself. They're really cheap.
Just a quick follow-up.
Yeah, Bob.
So then, in other words, as I understand what you're saying, is you're saying small clips, no major clips, like 30 rounds or more.
That's crazy.
Second of all, since we're looking at, okay, no automatic weapons, but as I'm getting the twine, semi-automatic, you can't really stop that because, like you said, you just keep pulling a trigger and self-load. So that's where the small clip comes into play with the semi-automatic.
That's right.
And the same thing with a pistol. You can't, I found pistols where you can put a 30 clip in there, and so same thing.
The shooter at Sandy Hook left the small clips at home, and he brought the high-capacity magazines.
And then full background checks, and including gun shows, internet, whatever you want to say, either ban or loophole.
Yeah, there's this
No loopholes.
crazy loophole of a young kid walking around to, he stops by a liquor store, his first stop. If you haven't seen this viral video, you should. And he tries to buy a six-pack of beer, and the clerk says, "Sweetie, you're too young for that." Tries to buy a pack of cigarettes at the next one, get out of here. Tries to buy a scratch-off lotto ticket and is laughed out of the store, but legally swings by the gun show and with cash is able to, in a person-to-person transaction without any check. And it doesn't make sense. In the case of Parkland, we, as a society, decided that a 19-year-old kid is not responsible enough to go buy a six-pack of beer, but can pick up an AR at Walmart on his way to school. That just doesn't make sense.
Thank you.
Sorry, someone over here. Yes, yes.
Hi. I appreciate your slogan, country over party. However, I do have some strong affinity to Democratic Party values. And I see that you talk about health care. For instance, I think Obamacare was great. It saved my family, when my adult daughter couldn't get health care because of her illness prior. So, but I'd like to know what your thoughts are about women's health care, about reproductive rights. I think those of us who grew up before Roe v. Wade, so that abortion can be safe and legal and available when needed, not at the extreme. I'd like to know your thoughts about that. And also this anti-immigration wave is really, I think it's a worry, and it's certainly not a Democratic Party value not to be welcoming immigrants. I'd like to know your thoughts about that.
What's your first name?
Frank.
Frank. Thanks for the question. And one of the things that frustrates me most when we have conversations about women's health care is that in 2018, we're still having it as a separate conversation. Healthcare is healthcare. And as a man, I don't have to fight for men's healthcare. It's all healthcare. And it frustrates me to no end that for women to have a conversation about health care, it has to be separate, and they have to fight for everything that's added on. I will tell you, I want to answer, as tough as it is, the first part of your question, that Anne Marie and I, my wife and I, years ago, we lost a baby at 13 weeks, and to us, it was a baby. It was a child. We planted an azalea bush, and every time we look at it, I remember that. But I'm not running, I'm a Roman Catholic, but I'm not running to be anyone's priest. I'm running to represent.
Challenging health issues and challenging situations. Whether, very simple things like when I was growing up, there's a law to say I can't get birth control if I'm not married. And there's so many things, and now, are we still talking about it? I appreciate your point. Are we still talking about this? So thank you.
Yes, yeah.
Mental health. Since Ohio did away with the mental health, and we have almost every one of those shootings was a mental health case. And today, police officers have very limited places to take people to be helped. You take them to the hospital, they only hold them so long. You take them to crisis center, it's 24 hours. There's such a lack of places to help people with mental health. And if you look at the issue of mental health, we're paying for what the decision made in the 80s was today, due to that fact. So what would be your position on bringing back some hospitals or areas to be able to deal with mental health issues? Because not only were both of those kids, between them and the armed guard, I mean, our Army, Navy, they have failed us in reporting the mental health issues associated with the people that have committed these mass crimes too. Mental health is a key factor in this whole discussion. And unless we take on the big factor, it's just so hard to get down to that issue without looking at it.
One of the things we have been really intentional about on this campaign is getting in the trenches and getting in the front lines. And this is one area that when you get up close to it, you see just how underfunded it is, just how devastating those decisions in the 80s were. You know, our de facto mental health system in the state of Ohio today is our prison system. It's our prison system. That just doesn't make sense. I've done more ride-alongs with deputies and law enforcement, and I can tell one of the things I ask for every time is to go into the jail at night, hopefully on a weekend. And the burdens that those corrections officers, those police departments, those law enforcement agencies are dealing with, on top of trying to keep our streets safe, having to provide the mental health backstop for everything, for what should be a mental health system that doesn't exist. You see it up close and personal when you ride along with Sheriff Meyer's deputies here in Stark County. And we've got to, you're absolutely right, Kim, we have got to get back to a place where we are investing in mental health and people actually have treatment options, because the long-term cost of not doing it, it's becoming obvious today, and it is way more expensive not treating it than it ever would be treating it. Yes.
David, I'm really concerned about NRA money in politics, and I wrote your campaign, and your wife wrote me back immediately, said you didn't take NRA money, which I was glad to see. I began to look at Bob Gibbs' NRA contributions, and I came across the Open Secrets website that gave a readout of both campaigns' funding, and found out that most of your money so far has come from out of state. Now, that's not an issue with me, but I'm asking you whether the party is betting on you being able to pull this off despite the gerrymandered district that you're running in, so that you're getting a lot of money from the East and the West Coast.
So we have gotten an incredibly humbling amount of support from Ohioans all over. We got a letter from someone from Coshocton who now lives in Central California, who said, I've read about what you're doing there, and I want to be part of it. I've also gotten a ton of support from my Navy buddies and their buddies. Word has caught on that there's a Navy pilot running in Ohio in a key district, and that's another thing that appears to have happened. And if you want to do the apples to apples comparison, we're building this campaign on the backs, on the support of thousands of individuals. We just broke the 3,000 individual support of this campaign. We're up against a guy who has 120 individual donors. That's not just a financial statement, that's a value statement. 3,000 to 120. But the reason an incumbent can do that, especially on an incumbent like Bob Gibbs, the reason he can raise hundreds of thousands of dollars with 120 phone calls is that in the morning he sits on these powerful committees that regulate or deregulate industries that he should be overseeing. He sits on transportation and ag. And that same day, in the afternoon, he can hop on the phone with the leaders of those industries and rake in thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. And the worst thing about that kind of corruption is that it's totally legal. We have pledged on our campaign to take 0 corporate PAC dollars.
So what I can draw from that is you're saying that this money is coming from individuals as opposed to, say, a party fundraiser in San Francisco or something like that.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think they call that, I don't know, but I think they call that a bungler. That we are not at that,
Okay.
we are not at that level. These are individuals who are speaking up and saying we need to take our country back. Yes, no, you're not going to say.
Hey, I'm Sam.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to thank Dave for the setup, because this is exactly where I wanted to go. I love most of the things you're saying are really good. I have 3 boys similar in age to your children, and I understand guns in school and all that. I understand all that. We should have coffee. But my concern is a lot of times what happens when we have town hall meetings and you're talking to your constituents is you say, kind of, not that you're not doing it, but you say all the right things, and then you get yourself to Congress, and next thing you know, we've got lobbyist money flying at you, whether you want it or not, right? So what happens then? What's your pledge about that? Because my concern is less about who we have in Congress right now and who's buying their vote right now.
I think you say no to the corporate PAC money. I mean, that's step 1. Step 2, and this is on you. This is on you. Hold your representatives accountable. Hold me accountable for the things I'm saying. And I think I mentioned this already. Don't just take my word for it. Vote for people who live the kinds of lives that make you able to believe in their work. If you're sending career politicians back again and again and again, I think you're going to get the same result. If you're sending people back who put their lives on the line, who sacrifice something for an oath to something greater than themselves, I think you're going to get a different result. And one of the most hopeful things that I'm seeing this year is the number of service veterans, service alumni running for Congress. And I'm not just talking about military vets, I'm talking about Peace Corps, I'm talking about public health service, I'm talking about Teach for America, people who, by how they've lived their lives, you know are going to behave differently than those who seem loyal only to a party or to that next campaign contribution.
And so would you agree that the lobbying money in Congress is more of what our problem is?
I think it's a huge part of it, but I think that's the instigator. The problem is politicians without backbone, politicians who are beholden to that money and not to the people who sent them. Yes?
My name is Kitty.
Thank you.
Do you see a solution to the spiraling cost of pharmaceuticals?
I see some quick steps to stop it. The question was, do you see a solution to the spiraling cost of pharmaceuticals? One of the worst things that we ever baked into a law in our history is this notion that Medicare cannot negotiate drug prices.
Right. Yes.
What a giveaway. And this goes back to your question, Sam. This goes back to a lot of people's concerns. If you wonder how in the world we got to a place where the biggest purchaser of pharmaceuticals can't negotiate for their prices, follow the money. Follow the money. Almost every time when you get some head-spinning law out of Congress, you get your answer when you follow the money. And if you look at the amount of money after Citizens United, and we can talk about that later, but the amount of money that flooded into political campaigns from the pharmaceutical industry, it's pretty obvious why both sides, and this is an indictment of the whole political class, why both sides gave away the farm and agreed to this insane rule where we don't let Medicare negotiate for drug prices. Thanks, Steve. Yes, in the back.
Yeah, to Gardner. My wife and I are both self-employed. I'm a small farmer, so I also have to teach part-time because nobody can make any money as a small farmer, as you well know. But my question is, as self-employed people, our single biggest family expense is health insurance and out-of-pocket health care costs. $10,000 to $20,000 a year. So my question is, we had a solution offered the last election, universal single-payer health care. The analysis on that said $1,200.
And I had a heartbreaking conversation with a farmer who had had a farm in the family for, I think he was the third generation. And he got sick. And he went to the doctor, he went to the judge for an SSDI adjudication to try to get some help getting through this illness because the healthcare bills were spiraling out of control. And they looked at the valuation of his farm, been in the family for generations, and they said, you gotta sell it. You gotta sell it to pay for your health care. He said, what do I do when I get better? And the answer was, buy a different farm. So I feel you, and the answer is not to build a market for farmers to have to sell their farms and get new ones. It's to create a healthcare system that serves working people, that serves the middle class. We live in the richest country on earth, and we can't figure this out. And this isn't just me channeling you or Robert or my dad. It's me as a father of a little girl with special needs. Lizzie needed 4 surgeries before she turned 4 years old. And I remember Andrew and I scheduling the first one of those without any way to pay for it, and it was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. I got lucky. I got a job with a great Ohio company and a gold-plated healthcare plan, but it shouldn't be a roll of the dice, not in the richest country on earth. And you're right, we've got to fight for a system that's fair. I get my health care from the VA. I grew up in a single-payer system as a military brat, so I think it's absolutely something we can entertain. Thanks. Let me get something else.
Well, how do you feel about Medicare for all that Bernie had?
What was the second part?
That Bernie.
Oh, how do I feel about Medicare for all? Like I said, growing up in a single-payer system, the military, TRICARE, and then get my health care from the VA, and then study in other countries. I know there's a heck of a lot we can learn from it, but as someone who is going to hopefully find himself in Washington, I also have to live in the realm of the possible, and there surely will have to be compromises. The foundational promise, though, has to be affordable access for everyone so that no one has to go through what we went through when we needed to get Lizzie that first surgery as a 6-month-old. I think about the stressors that put on our family. I think then about what I was fighting for overseas, and it doesn't seem like the richest country on earth should leave people to fend for themselves in situations like this. Yes.
My name's Paula, and I'd like to shift the conversation just a bit. I first heard you speak at a town hall that was held in Canton, where Bob Gibbs was invited to come and speak. He chose not to be there. This was before you announced your candidacy, but I remember listening to you and thinking, this is the kind of person that we need in Washington 100 times over. And I'm very grateful to you to be here tonight at a town hall, listening and responding to constituents. And I just hope that we'll be able to plan a retirement party for the incumbent when you win in the election. I want to ask you about the issue of hungry people, particularly children. And that was what I wanted to talk to Congressman Gibbs about, but he chose not to be there. He's on the Agriculture Committee. He voted for the Republican budget, which proposes huge slashes in what are the SNAP benefits, what we used to call food stamps. And I know just from my experience with the Stark County Hunger Task Force how many children go to bed hungry. every night. On the weekends, if they're in a school that is fortunate to have a backpack program, they may be going home with a backpack or enough food for that weekend. During the summer, they have to depend on a lunch program, if in fact there is one funded close to them. And yet we've got a Congress that seems to not want to consider that there is a hunger problem in this country. What do you see that should be done?
And it's not just kids, thank you, Paula, it's not just kids going to bed hungry, it's kids showing up at school hungry. Showing up at school hungry. Anne Marie taught in some of the toughest schools she could find, and that was just one of the most heartbreaking things. You referenced the backpack program. For those that don't know, what a lot of teachers are doing now in these schools is sending kids home with food so they can eat over the weekend. I don't know what to think about that as someone who fought for a country that should live up to its promises to its young people better than it does. But that teachers have to shoulder that burden of sending kids home with food so they can eat over the weekend. And you look at the downstream costs of not providing adequate nutrition for our kids. It has cascade effects in terms of their educational achievement, in terms of their health, and healthcare is a huge piece of this as well. I was at a food pantry, and a gentleman came in choking back tears because he was needing to get a box of food for his family. And his story, his feeling was that he had failed his family, but his story was that he had broken his wrist on the job. Working for a company, he was a trash hauler, broken his wrist on the job, company that did not have coverage for its employees because it was a small company. For 2 weeks, he kept loading cans with a broken wrist until the pain got so bad that he moved into the cab to drive. Did that for 2 weeks, and then the infection set in, and he had no choice but to go to the doctor. But what that meant was that he had to choose between food for his kids and paying the doctor, getting help for a broken wrist so that he could keep working. The fact that we force families to make that decision in this country is unconscionable. And thousands, probably tens of thousands of families are literally one emergency away from ruin, from not being able to provide food for their kids, like we saw at the food pantry. It was in Shelby. Thanks, Paula. Easy.
You mentioned that Bob Gibbs was on all these committees that are deregulating. And we've watched kind of silently, there's so much chaos with this presidency and this current Congress that there's a lot of things that are happening that we don't pay attention to. Right. One of the things that's happening is that we have a lot of regulations that are there to protect us in the banking industry, consumer products, engineering, construction, building, transportation, and in all of those areas, this Congress and this administration are systematically rolling back protections, things that protect us. And then we're aghast when a bridge falls in Miami, and how many people are under that bridge today? They're still pulling them out. Several Amtrak trains have crashed, knowing that there was technology that could have prevented that. And our government, I understand that we don't want to have regulations that strangle business, but when regulations are there to protect us, when they're rolling back protections. So how do we, if we get a new Congress, more congressmen like you, how do we get back to a point where we have our government functioning in a way that protects us from excess things happening in our culture that are destroying us simply because of greed?
Thanks, Beasley. The question was about deregulation, and I'm gonna riff a little, and what feels like an all-out assault on some of the fabric of our society, the things that have evolved over generations to protect us. And for me, one of the scariest things about the chaos in this administration and the distracting tweets and all of this stuff is what we're not hearing about, is the things that are sliding by because we're focusing on things that are surely important, but when they're pulling the rug out from under us by saying, look over here, it worries me a lot about what we're not noticing. I have had a great number of conversations with the rail transportation union about attempts to deregulate, and there's probably a better word for it. I would say just remove all of the safety provisions governing how trains move around. And they're talking about making it so a single engineer without a conductor is responsible for a 1.5 mile long train. The union guys are like, we need at least 2 people to be able to know what's going on from the back of the train to the front of the train. You can imagine that path through downtown Cleveland, a 1-mile-long train doing that with 1 conductor up front, not able to see the crossings or not even able to see the back of his or her own train because of how many turns. Just doesn't make sense. But I'll go back to what I said earlier. Follow the money if you want to know why these things are being proposed. Thanks, BZ.
Yes, sorry, I've been meaning to get to you. Yes, you first.
Hi, my name is Terrence.
Hey, Terrence.
And my question is, before this current administration, there was a real movement across the nation with criminal justice reform. What is some of your stance? What's your stance on that?
The question was about movement across the nation with criminal justice reform. I think we've got to resurrect that. I think one of the things we can do in 2018, and we're helping with it, is sentencing reform when it comes to nonviolent drug offenders. There's a fantastic petition going around. If you haven't signed it yet, do. I'll go back to my story about visiting the jails in the district. The number of nonviolent offenders that are locked up for a nonviolent parole violation or being picked up with drug paraphernalia when what they need more than anything is help, is crippling our judicial system. I had a conversation on DOORS 2 weeks ago. DOORS is our shorthand in the campaign for getting out there and literally knocking on doors and talking to folks, with a grandmother who was looking after her 4-year-old granddaughter because the girl's mother was an addict. Clean for 2 years, sober for 2 years, but had just been picked up on a parole violation because this poor mom had to take on 2 jobs, a day shift and a night shift, to be able to save enough money to get her little girl back, and was walking home from the bus stop after curfew, after parole, got picked up, and got a slap on the wrist. For her, that slap on the wrist was 30 days in jail. But you know what that means when you're a mom trying to save enough money at a job to get your little girl back? It means you lose the job. It means you're thrown back into an environment where there is no hope of staying sober. So we've got to have the kind of reforms that gives people like that an option to get help instead of go straight to jail. It doesn't help anybody. It costs more to lock them up. They go right back into that downward spiral. We've got to have the kind of sentencing reform that gives those people a chance. Yes?
You know, that brings us to the whole privatization of everything, where they make money putting these people in jail, and we're paying the tab while somebody else is getting rich with a big tax break. So I would just like to know, what is your stance on this overall privatization of things that used to be society's responsibility?
There are some things that should and must be our responsibility as the public, as the body politic. I come at this as someone who shouldered that responsibility in the military. Even there, they were trying to privatize, but trust me, you do not want a contractor flying combat recon missions off of North Korea. You want somebody who has sworn an oath whose obligation isn't to a corporation or to a bottom line, but whose obligation is to you. I think about along the same lines when I think about our prison system. The duty of those incredibly hard-working corrections officers that I've had the chance to talk with is to the public, it should be to the public, not to a corporation. So I think we can go way too far in privatizing, and that has to be our test. Should the duty of the people in this industry be to a company, to shareholders, or should it be to us? Yes, I'll get back to you.
Carol,
Carol, please.
how does your military service make you uniquely qualified for a seat in Congress?
Thanks, Carol. And I think you have to look at the nature of the service and the oath of office and the fact that we put the mission first, and we didn't care about anything else except the person to our right, the person to our left, and the mission that we were doing together. I think if we get back to that kind of ethos in Washington, getting things done, rising above partisanship to work as a team to get there, I think we could actually move the ball on a lot of these things. And there are, I think, a few areas of endeavor professionally that can really live up to this notion of country over party. When I say it, I can point to having put my life on the line for it. That it's not just a slogan. When I talk about the oath of office I swore as a 22-year-old, not being to a party, not being to a president, but being to the Constitution, being to you, I can point to 9 years of military service to back that up. It happens to be the same oath on paper that representatives to Congress swear, but there's a big difference when you put skin in the game, when you risk something for that oath. Thanks, Carol. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for calling me Ken. Pete again. You know, a lot of the issues we've been talking about, and you've been talking about, are definitely impacted by the money in terms of Citizens United, PACs, et cetera. One of the things I'd like to get your thoughts on is what is your feeling about the concept, and give me a second here, of public financing of at least House, Senate, and presidential campaigns? I don't think people realize, but back when I think it was Dole and Carter ran for president, it was a publicly financed campaign. Campaigns got no money from any corporations, and I think individuals are very low. But that takes the issue away from when Bob Gibbs calls up his agricultural buddies and asks for money, because he can't do that. One of the things I hear is congressmen spend 87% of their time calling for money. Guess what? If you take it and make it publicly financed, that 87% goes into governing instead of fundraising.
You're preaching to the choir. Yeah, Pete, you're right, and I'm all for it. I think it's great. At the end of the day, the job of a congressman shouldn't be picking up the phone, begging for money. Certainly when you're in a position of power, and it is obviously tempting to abuse it, because we're seeing that in this district. It should be to show up and to have these conversations and to represent. I feel like I've been neglecting this side, so pick your friend.
Okay. Heroin is obviously a huge issue in Ohio. We've had, I think, if I'm not mistaken, we're still leading the nation in heroin deaths, and that's despite all the Narcan that, at least in our county, we've been very progressive. We have a sheriff who actually gives Narcan out to prisoners when they leave, so they don't go take heroin and overdose and die. What are some of your ideas from the, and I know we're struggling on the local level and we're fighting the good fight, but what are your ideas on the federal level, and can you compare and contrast them to your opponents?
Let me put the exclamation point for everyone in here on the scale of the disaster. 5,232 deaths in Ohio last year, which is a 39% increase from the same period the year before. We lose more people in this country to heroin overdoses, to opioid overdoses, in a single year than we lost during the entire Vietnam War. And the first thing we have to do as a country is
call it what it is, which is an epidemic. It's not a crime spree. It is a epidemiological phenomenon. I say that as the former president of a disaster relief organization. I've been to refugee camps on the verge of epidemic outbreaks. This is an epidemic, and unless we call it what it is, we are not going to be able to break the cycle. I had a mom approach me early in the campaign, and this has been repeated probably 50 times since in some fashion. She said, "Ken, you've got to win. You've got to win because I just buried my only son. We were on a waiting list for months for a bed in a treatment facility, told there was no funding." And she's not wrong. Trump declared an emergency, put no dollars behind that declaration. It expired a couple of weeks ago, by the way, with barely a mention. This mom said, 2 weeks away from getting his bed, he overdosed and died. The stakes are life and death for the families dealing with it. The stakes for society are, it's almost impossible to put a price on it. You look at, take the foster care system, 1,000 more kids in foster care last Christmas than the year before, kids sleeping on the floor of social services because they can't find a family to place them in. You look at the rates of hepatitis going through the roof because of the IV users. You look at the impact on petty crime. For every 100 people not in treatment, and this is getting to the solution now, for every 100 people not in treatment in the Ohio 7th, you have 56 more break and enters, 12 more burglaries. The collateral damage from not treating this is many, many times more expensive than if we actually called it what it was, an epidemic, and treated it, made a bed available to everyone who came in begging for help. That's another conversation I have on a weekly basis. A grandparent, a mom, a sibling, a dad, who says, "I brought my loved one in. The nurse at the check-in desk, with tears in her eyes, said, 'Thank you for coming. This is an important milestone, realizing you need help. Come back in 3 weeks. We might have a bed.'" Do you think that person comes back in 3 weeks? Almost never. Almost never. We have to make that available. Thanks, Fred.
Can you answer, can somebody tell me, why is it the epidemic so bad? Why do we have such a drug problem? Why are all these people, and then when they go to rehab, they go back and they get back in all over again?
You got an answer? Easy to jump in.
My name is Sue.
Sue.
I don't know that I have the answer, but I have an opinion.
Sound like a politician.
A lot of these people they start out, their drugs are prescribed by their doctors.
66, sorry, go ahead.
And they get hooked. And the drug companies love that because you have the right to be pain-free. And it's a mess. And, nobody really oversees it. Now they're cracking down. And all I hear from some cronies that are hooked on this stuff legally, because they have a prescription, I gotta go every week, get my pills, or every 30 days I have to wait and then I have to drive over and take it. Well, and kids break into people's houses. They know they have them. They take them. It's sad. But you talk about they need beds in places. Where are they going to put them? TM and Altman are full. They just closed Massillon Community, or whatever, Affinity.
That's right.
Where are they going to put these people?
Well, stop closing hospitals for starters.
Or open up the psychiatric hospitals.
And Affinity that closed also had a senior psychiatric unit that's now closed.
Right.
People have to go online.
And I was out there on that January. The nurses at Affinity got that notification by email on a Friday night. The mayor of Massillon didn't even get a heads up. They were emailed along with the support staff and the doctors that they had 30 days to clear out. I talked to a family that next morning, because we were out there on the line with them, a family that brought in a little boy the previous summer with a bee sting, allergic reaction. And the nurses who brought this boy into the ER said the kid had maybe 4 or 5 minutes left to live. 4 or 5 minutes left to live. Massillon has had a full-service hospital since 1908. We've turned back the clock more than a century, and we've got a representative who has done nothing. He has voted to gut Medicaid every chance he's had. He's voted to gut the ACA over 50 times. And the only statement he made about the closing of Affinity Medical Center in Massillon, a community that's had a full-service hospital for over a century, was, "I'm concerned." Let me tell you, that little boy whose life they saved, if that hospital hadn't been there, the next option would have been 20 minutes away. He had 4 to 5 minutes left to live. He'd be done. Yes, in the back.
Hi, Hannah again. At this time, this is a personal question. I'm not dragging my group into any of this. I feel a lot of people stop talking in certain communities about LGBT rights when we got the right to marriage. And that's far from the case. The fight is still going. We still have basic rights that are not met. A lot of my loved ones are LGBT. I feel I am a part of that community, and I need to know that you have my back.
I have your back. I have your back, and I'm not going to just stand up here and say that. I'm going to tell you that when I was flying missions or serving in Team Rubicon, I couldn't have cared less what my co-pilot or the medic on the operating table next to me looked like, where they came from, or who they loved. All I cared about was, could we get the mission done together? And that's what we need to, that's the place we need to get to. Yes.
Hi, Ken. Thanks for coming. My name's Jennifer, and I wanted to follow up really quick and just have a comment. This isn't going to be popular. But my friend Samantha asked you about the money once you get there. And while I don't even recognize the Bob Gibbs that is representing us right now, 12 to 15 years ago, I did work alongside him with various issues with agriculture and the Farm Bureau and soil and water conservation. And he was not the not showing up, and I can't wait to attend that retirement party. And, so I do think, I guess it's a caution that when you go to Congress to represent us, to remember that that is possible and that not everybody that goes there starts out that way. Bob Gibbs didn't start out to be the devil incarnate here, okay? And also the Country Over Party, as a former Democrat and current nonpartisan in Ohio, I'm so sick of this two opposite ends of the spectrum system that we have going on right now. I think that as Democrats, if there's Democrats in the room or Republicans in the room, the closer we can come to working together and seeing each, sitting down and talking about it, not doing deals in the back room, but also treating the people on the opposite side of the aisle the same way that we would want to be treated. And so I hope that when you go to represent us in Congress that you're going to bring your slogan with you and have some more town halls once you're elected down there. And then my question, though, is I haven't seen, while I align with your much of what I've seen from you, I haven't heard much about your energy policy and your views on energy and conservation and environmental issues. So I'd like to know what your views are.
On the Country Over Party thing, I often joke with my parents, who are both Republicans, that if I can sit across the table from an Afghan warlord, which I have done, I can work with anybody. I can come home for Thanksgiving dinner. You're right. We've got to make this Country Over Party thing real. And I think we've got an historic chance in 2018 with the number of service vets running, not just military vets, but Peace Corps and other folks who've lived up to that. As far as energy policy goes, we've got to build that bridge to the 21st century, but I'm not kidding myself. It's not going to happen overnight. By 21st century, I mean innovative new energy sources. Ohio has such a wealth of resources to get this done. Wind energy, we should be leading the country in that. When you look at...
Well, I will say, I encourage you to look into that more. If you talk with anybody from Black Swamp Road Observatory and Division of Wildlife with the wind energy opportunities that are on Lake Erie, that isn't a cut and dry issue when it comes to clean energy.
Okay, I will, and please
I can
grab
put you in
one of us
contact with some
afterwards.
people.
Gary, yeah.
Contrary, Mr. Gibbs was the devil incarnate. Congress, the open trade with China, which helped lead in May 2000, you look at the plain dealer, May 22nd, 2000, and you'll see that Mr. Gibbs was lobbying for free trade with China, which led to the hollowing out of many of the industries in the state of Ohio.
The problem there is the incredibly unfair playing field that we have forced Ohio workers to play on. when I talk about the resources in this area, when I talk about what Ohio has at its disposal, from the Great Lakes to the other natural resources, the resource that is at the very top of that list are our Ohio workers. We'll outcompete anybody in the world if given a fair shot, if given a level playing field. And the problem is we have accepted an incredibly tilted playing field, especially when it comes to China. They are not playing fair. They are dumping not just steel, but they're dumping in other areas. They're stealing intellectual property, and we've got to stick it to them if we're going to give Ohio workers that level playing field that they deserve. Yeah.
We're gonna have about 15 minutes more of questions, and then Ken's gonna stick around and talk to you guys and answer anything more that you have. I just wanted to let you know that there's about 15 minutes left.
Thanks. Yes.
I'm concerned about country over party.
Okay.
I worked in the child care industry. It's now being called daycare. And every time there was funding come in, it was the Republican Party, oh, we can't do this, right? We don't have enough funds. We can't, that's court fair. We can't do this. So everything was gutted, always gutted. But the Democrats went along with Mr. Reagan during the 80s. Funding fell off. And then when the money would come through, the Republicans stepped right up, took care of it. And now we have an opioid problem and a gang problem in the district. I live in your district in Canton. And a big part of that is the fact that, is anybody overseeing our child care centers? Is there any fund? I know there's no money for that, just like health care. And it's kind of heartbreaking. I challenge anyone in here to go work in a child care center for a month.
What's your first name?
Cindy. I now have a job as a cashier in a big box store. I met you way back last summer. I got one of your first flyers that came out. And I hear you, and every piece of mail that came to my house from Mr. Gibbs was a bash on Barack Obama, who I knocked on 1,000 doors for. So I thought, this is...
He wasted a stamp there. He wasted a stamp.
It's representing me and my tax dollars, and I've worked since I was 15, and probably paid taxes since I was 18. are going to this man, so, good luck to you, but I'm real concerned about that collusion together, because usually the working person, whether they're union or non-union, that's worked to build this country is the person who then has to worry, in 10 years, am I going to have Social Security, or should I go live under a bypass in New Orleans? And it might be funny to some people, but to a lot of my friends, and to me, it's really the future.
Thanks for the question, Cindy. And as a footnote, do you realize that we pay for those mailers? That the mail that Bob Gibbs floods throughout the district are paid for with taxpayer dollars. So when I hear that there's not enough money to address the opioid crisis or these other issues, and then I see things like that, I see other examples of just outrageous waste, or, for example, treating offshore compensation for CEOs or bonuses, stock option bonuses, as untaxable. We could actually recoup $140 billion like that if we close some of these loopholes. So I don't buy the notion that there just isn't enough money to address the kinds of emergencies that we're seeing through the opioid crisis and other things. One of the things you learn as a disaster responder is that you stop the bleeding first. And when I look at the state of, we mentioned the opioid crisis, it is an arterial wound. And if I saw that as a disaster responder going into a disaster zone after a typhoon like in the Philippines, you would attack that right away. You would find whatever resources you needed to address that. So I don't buy that argument. Yes, back.
Hi, Ken. I'm Rita.
Hey, Rita.
Thanks for showing up. Before we leave, what do you think are maybe 2 or 3 things that I can do, or that each of us can do when we leave here, next week, next month, and the next 3 months, to help you get elected?
Thanks, Rita. I'm going to work backwards because the ultimate responsibility that falls on your shoulders is holding representatives accountable. Remember what we've talked about, and if I'm honored enough to be elected, hold me accountable, remind me. As far as getting there, I'm not naive, this is a real battle. We are fighting all of the advantages that an incumbent has. The ability to make as much money in 120 phone calls as we've been able to raise with literally thousands upon thousands of grassroots supporters. This is not a money answer, it's an advocacy answer. Talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors. On election day, votes are going to matter more than dollars. People are going to matter more than politics. If you want to help out the campaign, we have hundreds of volunteers who have knocked on thousands of doors and made tens of thousands of phone calls. And it's not nearly as scary as you might think, getting out there, talking to your neighbors. It will remind you of why we live here and why we're lucky to live here. I can honestly say, even having served as a Navy pilot and president of Team Rubicon Global, I can honestly say that I've never been prouder of my country than I am as a candidate, given the chance to talk to thousands of people and be reminded that there is way more that brings us together than we're told divides us. So we love your help knocking on doors, talk to your neighbors, making phone calls. This is a grassroots effort. Thanks so much. Yes?
There is a primary. You have an opponent, right? And it's a plant by Jane, right?
We have been campaigning since June. Like I said, knocked on thousands of doors and made tens of thousands of calls. There is going to be another name on the ballot, so I'm told, but we've got the unanimous endorsement of every county party chair and the Ohio Democratic Party. I think they're pretty confident that this is our campaign is one that can triumph and that is going to really represent.
Are there yard signs available somewhere?
There are yard signs. There are absolutely yard signs. If you go to KenHarbaughForCongress.com, we have a whole store now. We just put it up. And come summertime, I think we're going to have stacks of them, and we're going to get them out to everybody who wants it. But you can get an early one now. So did you? Milton, yes.
Yeah, my name is Milton Young, and born and raised here in Canton, Ohio. And I'm a member of the Buckeye chapter of the Paralyzed Veterans of America, actually. I'm my chapter hospital liaison up in the spinal cord floor of the Louis Stokes VA. And mine is only 26 spinal cord units in the whole United States. We deal with individuals that have suffered catastrophic injuries. That's spinal cord injury. I didn't get injured in the service. I got injured here at home. But that and suffered from ALS and MS. And each year at this time, and good time for your meeting, we send a delegation down to Washington, as we call it, advocacy legislation. We make appointments with all our senators and congressional leaders from here in the state of Ohio. I see on TV all the time how they sit up there and they tell you, we love our vets. Now when we go down to Washington and we've got these issues, and I give an example, as we call it, expanding eligibility for the VA Comprehensive Caregiver Program, which basically, this program takes care of veterans that were seriously injured on or after 9/11. And these veterans, some of the programs that are available for them, and this is for their caregivers, wife, family members, whoever's taking care of, is respite care, a monthly stipend, just in case, your family member or wife would have to stop paying, paid travel expenses to attend a veteran's medical appointments, and also health care through Champion VA and everything. But the problem with this, that we took our congressional leaders down there, is that date, 9/11, individuals prior to that, and the vast majority of them, and I think some some of the gentlemen in here were Vietnam vets. They don't have those same benefits. We ask our congressional leaders, all we ask them to do is just get rid of that arbitrary thing and level the playing field for all vets. I mean, what's the difference between a vet that served after 9/11 and before? We're all vets. We all took that. You took it, I took it, and there's others done 24/7, that will leave within 48 hours sometime and lay our lives down on the line for every individual in this room. But so we ask them, that just get rid of that arbitrary game and level the playing fields for all individuals that have veterans that have serious injuries.
I'm with you, 100%.
How do you feel about that?
My grandfather was a World War II vet, flew B-17s in the Pacific. My dad was a Phantom pilot in Vietnam, and this arbitrary distinction, it's political. That's what it is. It makes no sense. I remind myself every time I get a question like this of the Lincoln quote at the entrance to Lewis Stokes, at the entrance to most VAs, at the one I go to in Lorraine. For him who shall have borne the battle, for the widow and the orphan. The VA's promise is to care for those who have borne the battle, for their widows and their orphans. And for my part, I will say, and I hope you agree, Milton, that the care itself, especially my interactions with the nurses and the staff, has been pretty darn good. They are putting their lives out there for us, but it's the politics that they have to deal with, the lack of resources that they're forced to function with, that is the real outrage. They're not being given what they need to do the job, and it's politics more than anything, and I'm all for removing that distinction. Let me give you, hopefully this isn't the last question because I want to end on a high note, but when you talk about just how broken the politics is when it comes to caring for vets and widows and orphans, one of our top priorities is ending the widow's tax. The widow's tax is this loophole that takes away half of a survivor's continuing benefit that they have to live off of. A buddy of my brother's was killed in Afghanistan. I spoke to his wife not long ago. She is getting by with 2 kids on $15,000 a year because they slashed her benefit in half because of this widow's tax. When she goes to Congress, and when widows like her go to Congress and say, can you do something about this? And nothing happens, and they try to figure out why. What they've discovered is that, well, there's only a few 10,000 of them, 40,000 or something like that. They're spread all over the country. There's only a few in the Ohio 7th. That's not a constituency. That's not a constituency. Why would I go out of my way as a representative to do what's right for just a few hundred people? That's how broken our system is when we can't even do that for the widow of a friend of my brother killed in Afghanistan. And, you know, I frankly don't care how many constituents there are or there aren't for an issue like that. We've got to do right by those who have borne the battle, for the widow and for the orphan.
Hi, my name is Steve. I'm a retired union firefighter, and I want to thank you for coming to New Philly the other day and stand on the picket line with some of our brothers and sisters at Grado. I pretty much know where you stand on some of our issues, but for the people that don't know, can you tell them your position on right to work and collective bargaining?
Let's call it something else. It's not right to work. It's not right to work. One of our failings is letting them control the narrative and the vocabulary. Right to work is a blow to the heart of collective bargaining, and ultimately to the heart of the middle class, because unions gave us our middle class, and they're being undercut at every turn. And we've got to do what we can, whenever we can, even if it's, the morning shift down in New Philly, freezing our butts off around a 50-gallon drum full of firewood, holding the line, because these strikers, you know what they're fighting for? They're fighting so that their spouses can join their health care plan. I mean, something that we would have taken for granted just a few years ago, much less a generation ago. It's the basics that we're now holding on to as workers and working families in America. So yeah, I'm right with you, and we need all the help we can get on this one, because I think until we flip this Congress, we're going to keep getting hit. We're going to keep getting hit. Thanks, Steve. All right, I can. What's yours? All right. Yes, it's in the brain of the next. Yes.
My name's Diane. We talked about this, I think, last summer once, but charter schools.
Yes.
And the fact that they're for-profit schools and they're stealing money from our public education program.
Right.
So I listened to 60 Minutes and the Secretary of Education, who has no idea about education at all. What is your stand on for-profit schools?
Didn't she say she hasn't intentionally gone into it?
Yeah.
Well, I don't even know what she meant by that. I was going to follow up again. Have you unintentionally gone into a struggling school? The focus for me has always been on kids and teachers. Anne Marie will never let me forget that. She spent the first half of her career in struggling schools intentionally. And when we turn kids into profit centers, we undermine our faith in the system. Now, I'm sure there are teachers in that system, and I've actually talked to ECOT teachers who are doing the Lord's work, doing their best to help these kids. But when you make kids a profit center, when your ultimate duty is to a bottom line, when you look at the head of this for-profit online charter school, and you see that he's got a $3.5 million house in Florida and a $500,000 condo in Columbus, which buys you a lot of condo in Columbus. If you did an apples-to-apples comparison, if we saw a superintendent even of the largest school district in Ohio making that kind of dough, I think we'd be upset. So we've got to stop seeing our kids, my kids, as profit centers, and we got to reward the amazing work that teachers are doing and realize that they're the center of the mission, not some profit and loss statement that is getting combed over every day. Thanks so much. All right, I can stick around, right? I'll be here, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you so much for coming out. I meant what I said up at the top. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where democracy happens. Thank you all.